Well, while the pylon directed at the New South Wales Premier is intensifying, there is still no evidence of corruption on her part. But make no mistake, it is the Premier ICAC is after. Daryl Maguire is done like a dinner already. His confessions this week, they're not new. He's a long-gone, irrelevant country MP who could be dealt with by the criminal courts next week. Without most of this week's hearings at ICAC, it was mostly unnecessary. But as I've already said this week on Chris Kenny's program, ICAC has launched a fishing expedition in the hope of lucking onto a case of corruption. Well, at best, they've uncovered questions about her integrity and the notion of turning a blind eye to some very scant details that could or may qualify as dodgy. That's it. But for the Premier, it's been grossly destabilising and, of course, humiliating. Even McGuire admitted today keeping the Premier at arm's length about his dealings.
Do you agree that, at least in part, you sought to shield some of that information from Ms Berejiklian?
Yes.
You shared some, at least in general terms, as to what you're up to and what you're doing, correct?
Yes.
She was at least to some extent a sounding board or someone with whom you might discuss the kinds of things that you're involved in, at least in general terms, is that right?
Yes.
But it looks like, at least, and I'm raising this for your comment,
yes,
that there was a line at which you wouldn't fix her with knowledge in relation to your activities. Is that right, or is that going too far?
No, I think that's correct.
He stated as much on the very first day he took to the witness box, and towards the end of today, he's repeated all of that. To me, that is evidence supporting what Gladys Berejiklian has told ICAC. And the so-called accidental leak of private communications between McGuire and Berejiklian yesterday on ICAC's own website, well, it's not only appalling, but it does make the public wonder how accidental it was. It was left up for 30 minutes and then they had to plead with the media not to publish it. It is the kind of leak that's happened twice, according to the Premier today. Here was the Commissioner, Ruth McColl, first thing this morning.
On behalf of the Commission, I would like to apologise both to Ms Berejiklian and Mr McGuire for that inadvertent uploading. I should note that at the time that private transcript was uploaded, it was a subject of a Section 112 order I had made at the outset of the hearing, directing that the evidence given by Mr McGuire during that private hearing not be published in any manner.
Well done for at least an apology today, but it's not the first time ICAC's documents or the private conversations of various suspects have been made public. The private text messages of former prosecutor Margaret Cunneen were made public despite the High Court ruling that ICAC had no right to even have them. ICAC was roundly condemned for its investigation, of course, into Margaret Cunneen. And yet, despite all their so-called accidental leaks and failed prosecutions, they've never ever been forced to apologise. Again, they have themselves a well-publicised show trial this week, which will not result in a single charge being laid against the Premier. I still believe the Premier should probably do the right thing by the government and step aside. It doesn't preclude her from returning as soon as this investigation is over. But the noise is getting louder and the government has got very little clear air to govern and be heard on policy. And moreover, there's still the issue of turning a blind eye. But will she consider stepping aside?
You didn't want to know because he hadn't been appropriate with his disclosures, did you?
I'm sorry, I've already answered that question.
You didn't want to know, Premier, did you?
That is not correct.
You said you didn't want to know, Premier.
That is not correct.
What's the test for you to resign?
When I've done something wrong.
Well, the same sentiment about standing down has come from former New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions, Nicholas Cowdery. He argues that despite the Premier having a deserved reputation of a quintessential high school headmistress, a more serious impact is that she stood by her friend as he engaged in improper conduct. It raises questions, he said, about the Premier's judgment that cannot be passed over.
He's made two fairly serious errors of judgment that have been reported. That is, when she said that she didn't need to hear about some particular aspect that he was obviously moving to talk about. And I think the second error of judgment was that she continued the relationship after the allegations against Mr McGuire became known.
They are the two glaring points that can probably be a black mark against her reputation. Cowdrey points out there are none so blind as those who will not see. That, though, is not corruption. But the Corruption Commission seems to have appointed itself as a body which investigates not just corruption, but a lack of integrity as well. Work that out.